What is threat modeling? Welcome to the Exploring Information Security podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I'm your host, Timothy DeBlock, and in this episode, we will be exploring what is threat modeling. And with me today to do that is Wolfgang Goerlich, Vice President of Vio Point. Wolfgang, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing real good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. So first thing, what is threat modeling exactly?
Well, threat modeling is at its core, taking a threat or a given attack, breaking that out into its constituent parts, and modeling each step in that attack so that we can do several things. We can understand what it looks like. We can explain it to our peers in operations and in software development. And we can begin to figure out how we can put controls around each one of those steps so that should the threat happen, we'd be prepared and ready for it.
So why threat modeling? Why is it important?
Well, there's a couple different reasons for that. The main reason why threat modeling is important in my mind is to get to the state where we can have a rational discussion about what a real attack looks like. So, my background, a little bit about me, is I came out of the in-house IT space. And so for several years, I was in-house IT manager. I was responsible for software development and IT operations and security. And when you're in that space, right, you don't necessarily know what a real attack looks like. You may hear about it in the news. I would read something one day and go, oh, no, that sounds scary. I got to react. I got to be ready for that. And because of that lack of context, we end up creating a whole bunch of controls and a whole bunch of work for ourselves. So step one is just to contextualize what a real attack looks like and understand what a real attack looks like. And step two is, of course, to be ready for it, right? So often in software development or IT, we spend a lot of time trying to make things right, but not knowing where we're going to be attacked, not knowing where the attacks are going to come from, we miss things, right? We naturally miss steps in our defense. And those steps, those chinks in the armor, are exactly what attackers are taking advantage of today.
Now, something I've been hearing about within the information security is that you need to kind of be a hacker. You need to, you kind of need to understand or kind of get into that and kind of, do some. It almost seems like you have to kind of practice it. Is that something you need to do threat modeling?
It is. Either you need someone who can think like an attacker, or you need to be the person who can think like an attacker, right? So you can always partner with people. Myself, not doing much of the pen testing and whatnot, I often rely on my team to give me advice and guidance. But yeah, you need that insight, right? What does the real bad guy look like? What is the real bad guy doing?
So is it just a mindset, or do you actually have to know specific techniques?
It's both. One, it's a mindset in that, if you come up through the ranks of software development, you're taught how to build the code and work with the objects. If you come up through the ranks of IT, you're taught here's how a system works. Here's our layer of abstraction. Here's what we're trying to implement. And in both cases, the mindset very much is wrapped up in that layer of abstraction, right? Here's our abstraction. Here's what we're doing to apply it. Whereas the hacker mindset peels back the layer of the abstraction, right? Peels back to say, okay, yeah, that's what it looks like, but what is it really doing? What's the real underlying implementation? There was recently like an attack, and I say recently, I think it was maybe a year ago now, 2 years ago, on PHP. And it was a really cool attack, but what the attack was actually doing was recognizing that under the covers, PHP is executing C code. So by passing certain parameters in through PHP, it went into the C code and thereby exploited problems lower on down the chain, right? So that makes sense. It's understanding those different layers, that is the hacker mindset and how to move through those layers. But that said, even with the mindset of, okay, let's peel back the layers, you do need an understanding of the tactics and what the attackers are doing. What is their tools, tactics, and procedures?
Right. Okay. So what are some of the other skills that you would need to perform or put together an effective threat model?
Patience, patience, and communication. So the way to step back, the type of threat modeling that I perform is something called an attack path, and what that is a holistic system version of threat modeling. It's not necessarily like application threat modeling. So you can do threat modeling for apps, you can do it for systems, you can do it for organization. There's a whole bunch of different ways. But the way I do it is I do the attack path, which looks at all the systems in a given scope, looks at the business relevance of those systems, and looks at what the attacker's objectives are doing, what the attacker is trying to accomplish. So in that, you need to know why your IT matters to your business, know why it matters to the attackers, know those tools, tactics, and procedures the attackers are going to use, and then be able to have a good conversation with the various owners of those IT assets to say, okay, if this were to happen today, how would we detect it and how would we prevent it?
Okay, so it sounds like you want to kind of have a focused approach on certain things, but you also kind of want to have a bigger picture. Is that what I'm getting out of that?
Yeah, exactly. You need to keep an eye on the bigger picture.
But you still have to have you need to define the business, like what's important to the business, and then kind of do your threat modeling on that, like a particular part of the business, because like organizations have different functions.
Correct. And I think this is just information security tenet, right? Which is, if you're going to invest time and effort in securing something, even if it's something as simple as starting with a threat model and then building your controls around it, we want to be spending that time on the IT assets that are the most meaningful to the organization, and also the IT assets that are most likely to be attacked.
So would you start with the bigger picture then, just so that you can identify which ones are the most important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Start with the bigger picture. What is your most important IT assets if it gets attacked? And then, so that's your business relevance. And then look at the attacker objectives. What are the most likely things to be attacked?
Okay. So who should perform this threat modeling?
Who should perform the threat modeling? Well, I've seen a couple different ways that this has been done. I've seen it owned by the Security Operations Center as part of incident management, which is effective. I mean, they are the ones who are seeing the attacks, so they have a good idea of what the real-world attacks look like. I've seen it owned by, the CISO, of course, as part of an overall risk management program. And that's a good place to have it, because you need the ability to pull in the right people into the conversation and get things done also once you identify what controls you need. So I've seen it those two ways, and I've also seen this used by secure DevOps teams. So, for example, they may see a past attack or a pen test, threat model it, and then codify that threat model as a test that they then perform whenever they're making changes and updating their systems and their software. So I've also seen it used effectively as part of a QA process.
How do you know when you've got an effective threat model?
You know when you have an effective threat model when you've got a realistic threat, when you've got something that matters to the business, when you do the model and you do a tabletop exercise, everyone in the room learns something, right? It can be really eye-opening to your IT ops people. Oh, that's what an attack looks like. And when that threat model, once complete, can be used to drive change, right? To identify controls that need to be implemented, or to create a test case that could be, ran again against the environment to make sure that those controls are actually working as advertised.
Okay. And so what are some of the different aspects of threat modeling? I mean, I think we've talked about the first two steps there is understanding what it is and implementing, controls. along that attack path. But what are some of the other different aspects of that?
So we already mentioned relevance. We already mentioned objectives. We'd start with a story, right? Here's a real world attack that happened in our organization or in a similar organization. We break it down into the stages of the attack. Everything from external recon to, gaining the toehold to, exploiting some weakness in the system, getting persistence, right down to achieving that objective. So you break down the attack into various stages. You explain those tactics in clear language that could be explained to a senior technologist. So ideally, this threat model should be something you could explain to your CISO or your CIO. Then you tabletop with your subject matter experts, IT asset owners, what controls you have and what controls would be ideal. And then once you have those controls, you come up with an exercise that for detective controls would replicate the evidence of that particular tactic, or for preventative controls would test to make sure, am I really preventing from doing this? So for example, if I've got an attacker and he's going to shoot this exploit at my system, I could fire up Metasploit and shoot the exploit. If I've got an attacker and one of the stages is creating an account in Active Directory, and A, he shouldn't be able to do that because of my controls, and B, if it does happen, I should be able to detect it, and my incident response team should react. Well, I can give it to my IT team and say, hey, create a user under these conditions. Let us know if you can, because that means the control's not working. And once it's done, if you can, let us know that the actual incident response team did see it and did respond. So scenario, tabletop, and then exercise.
Okay. Is there a way to flip the threat modeling so you can do this for internal breaches? Because it seems like we're dealing mostly with attackers coming from the outside.
So, yeah, that's a really good question. We don't only want to look at the outside, right? So many of the attacks are the insider threat, or moreover, someone is brought an infected box in or whatnot. So yeah, absolutely, we do have we have done insider threat modeling, which is pretty similar. You just skip those first couple steps, right? They're not going to be doing external recon. They're not going to be exploiting, but they are going to be looking around internally. They are going to be attempting to access files and emails and things they shouldn't. They are going to be transmitting lots of data. And that's the other thing that, getting back to your question, right, about what's an effective threat model, is that if you take this threat model and then you build it into your controls, you can then look for things that look like that threat model. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So give you a perfect example. We did a threat model of an insider threat, and we did it like on a Friday. We did a security exercise, looked like it was good. We implemented it into the SIM that they were using, and the very next week we get a call and they're like, well, hey, you know that threat model we did? I'm like, yeah. And they said, well, kind of funny, either we didn't implement the controls right, or someone just attempted to do what we modeled. And we started peeling back the onion, and sure enough, within 3 days, someone had attempted enough of those steps that the SIM, which we had configured to, check for this type of threat model, had triggered. They investigated, and lo and behold, there was someone who had been terminated, but their account was still active, and they were poking around a few days afterwards, trying to see what they could still get at. So yeah, absolutely, insider threat is very real, and I think that's also a good example of leveraging a threat model to build controls and then check for these things to happen.
So, and that seems to be the biggest thing is kind of checking, like understanding your environment and then putting it to the test. I really like your attack path analogy there, and I almost imagine like you've got like a gate. Someone gets past a gate. You got someone standing, down the road with a baseball bat ready to bonk someone over the head. And that's kind of see what I see there. Is there anything else that I need to understand to implement threat modeling?
No. I think threat modeling is pretty simple. There are many ways to do it. So today we're talking about the attack path, which is really a top-down, high-level approach. There's some really good ways to threat model your application. So as part of a secure development lifecycle, there are things like Stride and whatnot that apply the threat model to a feature as opposed to a system, which is very handy. There are very complex threat models that you can use if you're concerned about the relative weight of different scenarios that an attacker would take. And that's where you get into things like gamification. But I think the attack path to me is the simplest way to do a threat model and yet get a lot of value out of it in terms of building your controls, getting the guy there with the baseball bat, doing the right things so that you can be ready for what a real attack looks like.
Well, it almost seems that would be easier to explain to a CIO or even a CEO.
Yeah, it definitely is, and that's one of the reasons why I began this approach many years ago, because I started looking at attack trees, and boy, attack trees are fascinating. If you ever have a surplus of time and interest in gamification, because you basically wait out all the various possibilities that attacker could take through your system, and make a very beautiful looking tree graph. But I got to tell you, if I now need to explain that to a CIO or CISO, you know what I mean? It's horrible. It's like, you see this little line right here? If we just increase the weight and make a loop, it's like, they have no idea what you're talking about.
It's a tree.
It's a tree. It's beautiful. We just need to prune it.
Yeah. And no one likes pruning. No one likes pruning.
That's true. That's the only thing I ever hear people, criticize attack path is it is an oversimplification, to which I reply, great. I want something simple that I can get a lot of value out and then I can explain to others.
Right. Well, and like any hiking path, you can make several different attack paths. So you have different, or maybe like ski routes or whatever. You got your black diamond, you got your your bunny slope and all that.
I like that. The bunny slope threat model. Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, there's minor threats versus your more black diamond threats that you probably want to get control of. So, and might be a little bit more complicated and to handle. So,
I agree.
What are some of the resources that can be utilized to accomplish threat modeling? Is there like a book or web links? Obviously, your talks at various cons are a great resource. But what are some of the things that kind of helped you?
So a good book for threat modeling, it just came out by Adam Shostak. It's actually called Threat Modeling. It's Designing for Security. And it is very applicable to Microsoft's model of threat modeling, because that's where Adam works. But does a very good job of explaining start to finish the process of identifying threats, doing the models, and then communicating it back to the people who are responsible for building and securing the systems. So that is a very good resource to look at.
And what's the name of that book again?
Threat Modeling, Designing for Security.
And that's by Adam
Shostak.
Okay. All right. Any other maybe online resources?
There is, along the same lines of Microsoft, there's a lot of resources in Microsoft for their SDL. I'd also encourage people to look at the kill chain methodology by Lockheed Martin. Those are the main ones. We are also, within the MISEC community, working on a white paper for attack path. That should be coming out this year, but as with any security community, we're all pretty pressed for time. So
right.
I'm not sure when that's going to be available for people.
Okay. Well, any last thoughts on threat modeling that we didn't cover in this podcast episode?
Do we want to talk about lifecycle and frequency?
Sure.
So the way I would suggest doing threat modeling is frequently, obviously, on new systems that are coming on as part of the implementation plan. Also, overall, at least quarterly, In many instances, we do them monthly. So as new threats are identified, either in investigation by the security operations team, or the new scary thing that's hit the news, or as information is being shared with their ISACs, doing a monthly threat model works very well to keep people informed, to break down the news into specific tactics and whatnot. And then we would roll those up into either a quarterly or biannually drill. So just like you have a fire drill, just like you have a BCP drill, those threat models can then be used for instant response drills. So you basically get a lot of bang for your buck that way.
Okay, so it kind of sounds like your attack paths are almost always evolving, which makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's always a new threat out there. There's always a new attack, right?
So you want to kind of reevaluate like you were saying, every month. I don't know if that's feasible for everybody, but it sounds like you at least want to have that in the back of your mind that, okay, we've got this taken care of. Maybe we need to go back and revisit this at some point.
Right. And it's not a time-intensive thing. It can be done within like a half day.
Okay. Would that be even building the threat model itself, or it seems like that would take a little bit longer?
Absolutely. Well, it depends on how much insight you have into an attack, right? So what I see some mature organizations do is, all right, we've had a security incident. As part of their post-mortem, they would do the threat model of what that incident looks like. And then the next time they did a threat model exercise and brought everyone in, they walk through the various tactics that were used and again discuss the controls and build an exercise. So, it's depends on how clear of information you have about what that attack looks like. If it's pretty clear, it's pretty straightforward. If it's something like, hey, this particular university got breached and they've got a bunch of records, well, obviously there's not enough data there to build a good threat model.
Right. Okay. Well, that will do it. Hopefully you learned something. If you didn't, drop me a line on Twitter at TimothyDBlock or email me at timothy.dblock@gmail.com and let me know what you didn't learn, and we'll try to cover it in a future podcast. Wolfgang, did you have anything you wanted to plug?
No, that's good. I really appreciate you having me on. This is a very valuable resource, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you. You can follow Wolfgang on at J Wolfgang Goerlich. That's Goerlich. And have a good one.